My name is Marin Langford, 49 systems architect, and the quietest person in every meeting I've ever survived. People used to mistake that quiet for obedience. They don't anymore. At 12:07 p.m., the boardroom of Vayner Systems shook with voices. Through the live security feed muted on my laptop, I could see the founder slam his hand against the glass table, his voice breaking through the static of a dozen microphones. Why is our $500 million software under her name? The words landed like thunder. Someone dropped a pen. Someone else whispered my name. On the split screen, rows of error messages flooded the monitors behind them: authentication failures, locked access, licensing denials. I watched it all from a cafe on Roosevelt Way, where the air smelled of espresso and wet asphalt. My phone vibrated again. 200 missed calls, 91 unread messages. The last one from Brock Mitchell, the CEO's son, who had fired me that same morning. Brock Mitchell, the man who told me, with his perfect MBA smile, "The exit is behind you, and don't use the main door." I turned my phone face down on the table and lifted the cup to my lips. The coffee had gone cold, but it didn't matter. Across from me sat Jeff Patel, my lawyer, calm as ever, sliding a tablet toward me. The licensing contract glowed on the screen: 3-year exclusivity, non-transferable rights, and a clause that would make even the board's attorneys sweat. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. My signature appeared beneath my name. Marin R. Langford, owner, Red Loop Systems LLC, the same shell company I'd incorporated 20 years ago to hold the code they'd forgotten I owned. Outside, rain hit the window in soft, steady rhythms. Inside, the feed showed chaos suits pacing, phones flashing, the founder ripping off his glasses. I let the screen dim to black. For the first time in 2 decades, no one could tell me what to fix, who to answer to, or which door to use. 12 hours earlier, I had been told to leave quietly. At 9:15 a.m., I was called into the glass conference room that overlooked the gray sweep of Elliott Bay. The city was still waking up, fog rolling over the cranes and rooftops, the ferry leaving a thin white scar across the water. Inside, everything felt rehearsed, as if someone had practiced this moment in front of a mirror. Brock Mitchell stood at the head of the table, hands folded, posture perfect. He looked too young to wear authority the way he did 30-something, clean jaw, a watch worth more than my car. 2 people from HR sat beside him, their laptops open, eyes already filled with sympathy they didn't feel. "Marin," Brock began, in that slow, patronizing cadence executives are trained to use when they want to sound human. "You've been with the company a long time. We appreciate that. But the board's decided to modernize operations. It's time for fresh perspectives. The exit is behind you." He smiled like he'd just won something. "And, please don't use the main door." The words hung in the air, small, sharp, absurd. I stared at him, at the reflection of the city skyline in the glass behind his head, and thought of the first time I'd walked through those doors 20 years ago, carrying a second-hand laptop and too much hope. I could have said 100 things. Instead, I felt something inside me still, like a pond after a single pebble sinks. I nodded once. Understood. Janet from HR blinked, waiting for tears or outrage. When I gave her neither, she fumbled with her pen. Brock cleared his throat, already moving on to the next agenda item in his mind. I reached for my bag, the one I'd carried through 3 CEOs, 7 product launches, and more sleepless nights than I could count. As I left, I turned off the light switch by the door. The sound click echoed softly through the room. It was the same sound from my first day. I didn't look back. The side stairwell smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner, and the morning air waiting outside felt cleaner than it had in years. I didn't drive home right away. My hands rested on the steering wheel, the rain streaking across the windshield like the code I used to write endless lines, running silently in the background while others slept. 20 years of quiet work doesn't disappear just because someone younger wants your chair. It lingers, humming beneath every process, every login, every heartbeat of the system. Back then, we weren't a company. We were 4 people sharing a rented basement near Lake Union, surviving on vending machine coffee and leftover takeout from a Thai place that never closed. I wrote the first line of code for what would become Vayner Systems on a borrowed laptop with a cracked hinge. The server was a second-hand desktop that wheezed every time it booted up. When we finally made it out of that basement, the others started calling themselves founders. I stayed behind, debugging, rewriting, stabilizing the chaos. When the company merged, when it got funding, when the first suits arrived with their clean hands and shiny promises, I stayed. Someone had to keep the pulse steady while they played Empire. The years blurred together. I watched names change on the doors, watched people rise, flame out, and vanish into LinkedIn posts about new opportunities. I fixed systems at 2 a.m, missed weddings, funerals, birthdays. I kept things running so others could sleep. On my shelf sat a chipped mug that said "Coffee First," bugs later in faded black letters. HR once offered to replace it with a branded one. I told them no. That mug had been with me through every crash, every midnight call, every version that almost broke the company. Its crack caught the light every morning, a small, quiet fracture that somehow held in the end. That's what I became too, a fracture that held the structure together, a ghost in the machine unseen, indispensable, and already halfway gone. By the time the rain eased, I had driven halfway across the city without deciding where to go. My body chose for me. The car turned toward the University District, toward a small cafe tucked behind the public library where I used to work on early builds when we couldn't afford an office. The same crooked sign still hung over the door, the same smell of burnt espresso and old books inside. The barista looked up, startled, then smiled. "Marin, haven't seen you in forever." 15 years, I said. "Do you still make those molasses cookies?" She nodded toward the counter. I ordered one and sat in the far corner, the table still wobbly if you leaned too hard. Some things never changed, some things shouldn't. From my bag, I pulled out a red leather binder, its corners worn smooth, the spine faded to rust. It had followed me through every office move, every layoff, every rebrand. I'd nearly forgotten what it contained until Brock's smirk this morning made me remember. I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of old contracts, technical drafts, and one notarized document dated June 2004. The words were plain but sharp. Ownership of all source code, libraries, and compiled executables shall remain with the author, M.R. Langford, until full equity conversion is documented and signed. It had never been signed. We were supposed to update it later. We never did. I read the paragraph twice, feeling the calm settle in like a slow breath. My signature sat at the bottom, blue ink slightly smudged, proof of 20 years of negligence quietly waiting. I took out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in years, Jeff Patel. Back then, he was a junior associate helping us draft those same agreements. Now he ran his own firm downtown. "Marin," he said when he picked up, "didn't expect to hear from you." "Hi, Jeff. I think it's time we talk about red loop systems." There was a pause. Then the faint sound of a chair creaking. "You still have the binder, don't you?" I glanced at the cracked leather under my hand. "Always." The sky over Seattle had darkened again by late morning, the kind of slow-moving storm that looks patient but never harmless. I sat by the cafe window, the red binder closed beside my laptop, half listening to the rain and the low chatter around me. My coffee had gone cold again. At 10:12 a.m., the first notification blinked across the corner of my personal dashboard, an old monitoring channel I still had passive access to from the early architecture days. Authentication failure client ID not verified. Then another, and another. I leaned closer. The sequence was familiar. The system was doing exactly what it had been designed to do 2 decades ago. Not malfunctioning, protecting itself. The core licensing kernel of the platform was built to validate ownership every quarter through a handshake protocol. For years, That handshake had run automatically because the company's account was mapped through my developer key. When they deactivated my credentials, they also severed their own verification. By 10:37, the alerts multiplied bank clients, healthcare dashboards, government test servers all timing out one by one. The system's message repeated on every screen: primary license holder not recognized. Inside the office I had just left, I could imagine the rising hum, the frantic calls to IT, the theories about a cyber attack, the arguments over who had last touched the back end. Someone would suggest a reboot. Someone else would panic about losing production data. I hadn't written a single new line of code. I hadn't broken anything. I'd simply stopped fixing what was never theirs to control. Outside, the rain turned steady, tapping against the window like keystrokes. Across the street, the trees swayed under the wind, the same rhythm that had carried me through 1,000 late nights debugging while the world slept. I closed my laptop halfway, letting the reflection of the storm ripple across the metal surface. The city lights began to blur through the glass, a silent mirror of the system unraveling in real time. Somewhere downtown, alarms were starting to sound. I didn't need to look to know whose names were flashing red on those screens. By noon, the company's group chats were melting. I could see fragments of them through the old integration logs that still pinged my private dashboard threads marked urgent, message counts climbing by the second. It was shouting into the void. Legal was copying everyone. Someone in management had written the word breach 3 times in a row. At 12:08, a new name appeared in the log, Maya Ortiz. I remembered her, a quiet junior engineer I'd mentored during her internship 2 summers ago. She used to ask real questions, the kind that made you stop and think. Now, her username flashed through the audit channel, digging into the company's archived mail server. Her message was short. Found something 2019 chain attaching screenshots. I didn't have to open them to know what she'd found. The subject line told me everything IP transfer follow-up unresolved. My old email to Brock and legal. My reminders that the licensing agreement was still pending formal conversion. His reply beneath it, not a priority right now. Let's stay focused on modernization and forward velocity. There it was. The entire company's arrogance condensed into one sentence. Jeff called a minute later. They're unraveling, he said, voice calm but edged with quiet disbelief. Your name's on every internal thread now. Legal's accusing DevOps. DevOps is blaming HR, and HR is forwarding your old emails like confession letters. I laughed softly, not from joy, not even from spite, just from the absurdity of it all. 2 decades of invisible labor, dismissed with a smile, and now resurrected line by line, signature by signature. On the cafe table between us, the red binder lay open. Jeff was methodically scanning each page, cross-referencing dates, matching them with server logs I'd backed up years ago, proof upon proof. Receipts stacked like quiet dominoes waiting for a push. Outside, sirens cut faintly through the sound of rain. Someone inside that tower would be realizing the truth: nothing had been stolen, nothing sabotaged. The system was merely reflecting what it always knew, whose name it belonged to. Jeff looked up from the papers. You really kept everything, he said. I built everything, I answered. Keeping it was the easy part. By mid-afternoon, the cafe had emptied except for me, Jeff, and the low hum of the espresso machine cycling through its last order. The rain had stopped, but the air outside still carried that metallic scent of thunder, not quite gone. Jeff sat across from me, sleeves rolled, glasses slightly fogged, a man who thrived in crisis but never enjoyed it. They're calling nonstop, he said, flipping through the pages of the draft contract. The founder wants to discuss options. The board's asking if this can be resolved quietly. You want my advice, I already know it, I said. We set terms, not tears. He smiled faintly, sliding the document toward me. Then here's our opening line. I read each clause slowly. $90 million up front, 10% royalties on every new installation. Architectural veto rights my approval required for any change to the system's core, a public statement retracting my termination and acknowledging my authorship. And finally, Brock Mitchell's removal from operational authority. I felt no triumph, only the weight of precision. Each demand was measured, deliberate, clean. This wasn't a strike born of anger. It was architecture blueprint replacing emotion. But one line was missing. I took Jeff's pen and wrote it in the margin continuity exemption for hospital networks and emergency infrastructure. No disruption of care services under any negotiation. Jeff read it, then nodded. You don't want blood on your code. I want proof, I said, that I could fight back without becoming what they were. He leaned back, studying me. You're different from most clients I've seen in this chair. I've been building systems my whole life, I said. Now I'm just building boundaries. He reached for his phone. I'll send it over before they can draft their excuses. Through the window. The city glowed dim and washed, like something being rewritten by the rain. My reflection stared back at me tired. Yes, but unbroken. I closed the binder, smoothed the cover, and signed my name below the new clause. For the first time in 20 years. It wasn't at the bottom of a contract. It was at the top. The boardroom looked like a war zone by the time the founder arrived. From the security footage later sent to Jeff for legal records, I saw the details, the half-drunk coffee cups, the shredded printouts, the sleepless panic behind every polished face. The clock on the wall read 4:02 p.m. The founder, Harlan Vayner, didn't take off his coat. He stormed in from the private elevator, still wearing sunglasses despite the fluorescent glare. The sound of the door hitting the wall made everyone flinch. Why? He shouted, slamming a folder onto the table. Is our $500 million software under her name? No one answered at first. The general counsel finally stood, hands shaking as he flipped open a stapled document, one of the contracts I'd written 20 years ago. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Clause 7.3 signed by Marin Langford. Licensing rights remain with the author until transferred or renegotiated in writing. Silence pressed against the glass walls. Someone's phone buzzed, then stopped. Across the table, Brock tried to recover his smile, the same one he'd practiced in interviews. It's a legacy oversight, he said, palms up, an old placeholder clause. We were going to update it. Were you? Harlan's voice was low now. Dangerous. Because I just saw the emails. The screen behind them lit up with a projection my email to Brock. Dated 3 years earlier, reminding him to finalize the transfer. His reply below it. Not a priority right now. Let's stay focused on modernization. Brock's face drained of color. The founder exhaled through his teeth, a sound closer to disbelief than anger. Then he turned to legal. Draw it up. Every term she sent, pay it. And him. He pointed at Brock without looking. Out. Effective immediately. No one moved. The contract was signed at 4:36 p.m. The ink dried on heavy paper embossed with the company seal. And in that same room where I'd once been dismissed with a smile, my name was written again, this time not as an employee, but as the owner of everything they thought was theirs. 2 days later, I stood again in front of the same glass tower where Brock had told me to use the side exit. The rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalk slick with reflected light from the lobby's marble floor. Everything looked exactly as it had before. Same revolving doors, same reception desk, same faint scent of burned coffee drifting from the break room. Only one thing had changed. When I held my badge to the scanner, it turned green. The soft chime sounded like a heartbeat returning after a long pause. The security guard glanced up, recognition flickering across his face, then quickly looked away. I didn't need his greeting. The hum of the elevator was welcome enough. The fifth-floor hallway was silent. The potted plant outside my old office had been overwatered. Its leaves drooped under the weight of someone's clumsy attempt at care. I touched one gently, brushing off a drop of water, and pushed open the door. The room smelled the same dust, ozone, and the faint trace of the lemon cleaner used by night crews. My bookshelf still leaned slightly to the right. The mug with coffee first, bugs later, sat in its usual place. the crack in its handle catching the light like a healed scar. I didn't sit down. I just stood there, taking it in the empty chair, the silent monitors, the hum of the building that still pulsed with code I had written decades ago. Near the wall, the light switch waited. My fingers found it easily, the same shape, the same smooth resistance. When it clicked, the fluorescence buzzed to life overhead, scattering brightness across every surface. I had turned off that light once as an act of closure. Now I turned it on, not as an employee returning, but as the architect whose name lived inside every system heartbeat. Outside the window, the city shimmered with its gray-blue calm. For the first time, I wasn't part of the machine. I was the foundation beneath it, steady, silent, and unmovable. The hum in the room steadied, filling the quiet with something that sounded almost like peace. Weeks later, the days had settled into a quieter rhythm. The frenzy had faded from the news cycle, replaced by some news scandal about mergers and layoffs. But every so often, my inbox would ping with a message from a founder I'd never met, each one polite, careful, and eager to talk about ethical infrastructure consulting. The irony wasn't lost on me. I worked from a small apartment overlooking Lake Union, sunlight shifting across the water like slow code compiling. My desk held only what mattered: my laptop, the red binder, and the same cracked mug that had outlasted every version of the system. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was earned. On Wednesdays, I mentored Maya Ortiz through video calls. Her hair was always tied back, her eyes full of that same restless intelligence I remembered in myself years ago. She was leading a new DevOps team now, designing recovery frameworks and refusing to let anyone else take her credit. "You think they'll ever understand what you did?" she asked once. I smiled. Understanding was never the goal. Later that afternoon, Jeff stopped by with 2 coffees and a grin that hinted he'd been following the market numbers. "They've stabilized," he said. "Revenue's back up. The founder issued another statement this morning. Gave you credit." Again. I didn't need credit. I said, "Just accountability." He nodded. "You sure you don't want me to pitch your story? People would love to read it, what you pulled off." I shook my head. No revenge stories, just truth. I didn't burn the system. Jeff. I simply stopped fixing their mistakes. Outside, the clouds had thinned. The air carried the scent of wet cedar and something almost like spring. I gathered my coat, walked down to the street, and let the sound of traffic fold into the calm. The city's noise moved around me, not through me. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't part of anyone's architecture but my own. The rain started again, gentle, forgiving, and I didn't hurry home.